Good morning, Minecrafters, and welcome to part 2 of Embracing Your Fear and Moving Forward. In the last episode, we touched on the neuroscience behind anxiety and fear and how the worry circuit works in the brain, as well as how this feedback loop of internal dialogue, what we're saying to ourselves, is actually self-reinforcing. And as long as this thought process is allowed to have control, these thoughts will become stronger and stronger and stronger, which means our feelings of fear and anxiety will continue to become stronger as well, since thoughts come first and feelings come second. In this week's episode, we'll expand on this by discussing how we can actually develop a fear-based mindset, especially when we are faced with any kind of scarcity. So during this current pandemic crisis, as we live so rurally, I've had the good fortune to take lots of walks in the woods with our golden retriever, for which I am very grateful. And over the last week, I've just given thought to this particular episode, and right out of the gate, I was brought back to middle school, an American history class, and remembering that very famous quote by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who I think many would agree was definitely one of our greatest American presidents. That quote where he said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." I think about how I may have processed these words back in 7th grade. And though I certainly couldn't remember exactly now, I know that it would be much different than how I process these words now at 55 years old and after raising 5 kids and now being in the midst of this global crisis that involves so much scarcity and therefore so much fear. When FDR delivered his famous inaugural address in 1933, he actually even said a little more than this. He said, "First of all, let me assert from my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." So, certainly kids obviously can get fear. They can be bitten by a dog, all the way up to, something trauma related. They can absolutely understand fear. I just don't know if that's the same as how we process this as seasoned grown-ups, especially when we're responsible for other people. Children, aging parents. It's a game changer. And this idea that FDR says in his inaugural address about how the only thing to fear is fear itself because of the paralyzing, just crippling intensity. It seems kind of reside in the upper torso area too, this just tightness. And I liked how he said how it prevents us from converting, retreat into advance, how this overwhelming emotion stops us, tries to stop us from moving forward. I then read a little further, just for kicks, and was sort of grabbed, by, the obvious parallels. And FDR continues to say, more importantly, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, and an equally great number toil with little return. Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. And FDR further touches on, families wiping out their savings, farmers not having consumers for their crops, sort of leading us directly to that concept of scarcity and what this does to the human condition. And by scarcity, we mean having less than you feel you need. And there's a good read out there called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much, by Sindhil Molinathan and Eldar Shafir. The authors go on to explain that scarcity is a broad concept. The problem of unemployment, for example, is also the problem of financial scarcity. The loss of a job makes a household's budget suddenly tight. Too little income to cover the mortgage, car payments, and day-to-day expenses. The problem of increasing social isolation is a form of social scarcity, of people having too few social bonds. The problem of obesity is also, perhaps counterintuitively, a problem of scarcity. Sticking to a diet requires coping with the challenge of having less to eat than you feel accustomed to. A tight calorie budget, or calorie scarcity. The problem of global poverty, the tragedy of multitudes of people around the world making do with $1 or $2 a day, is another kind of financial scarcity. Unlike the sudden and possibly fleeting tightening of one's budget due to job loss, poverty means a perpetually tight budget. What I found fascinating about how the authors talk about scarcity is that it's not so much about what we're lacking, the food, the money, the social relationships, or the time, but more about what it does to our mind and how scarcity takes over. And we become conditioned to being in this place of being fear-based, and it not only governs whatever it is we feel we're not getting enough of, but actually takes over our perception in general. And it has a lot to do with what we look for and see, and then how we react and respond. The authors illustrate how this works by a study that was done way back towards the tail end of World War II, when the Allies were getting ready to advance into German-occupied territories and knew they would encounter, obviously, large numbers of people on the edge of starvation. And the problem was not food, but like how to safely feed people who have been on the edge of starvation for so long. So a team of researchers at the University of Minnesota began a study. Again, this is back at the end of World War II, so I'll go out on a limb here and say it was probably before many of the ethical guidelines were put into place, even though their intentions were good. They set out to find out, once again, what was the safest way to feed people that had been so deprived of food for so long. So the experiment started with healthy male volunteers in a very controlled environment where their calories were reduced until they were subsisting on just enough food so as not to permanently harm themselves. And then after a few months of this, the real experiment began, finding out how their bodies responded to different food regimens. Though the researchers cared mostly about the feeding part of the study, they also measured the impact of starvation. Much of what happens to starving bodies is quite graphic. Subjects lost so much fat on their butts that sitting became painful. The men had to use pillows. Actual weight loss was complicated by edema. The men accumulated as much as 14 pounds of extra fluid due to starvation. Their metabolism slowed by 40%. They lost strength and endurance. As one subject put it, I notice the weakness in my arms when I wash my hair in the shower. They become completely fatigued in the course of this simple operation. Once again, this is what we would sadly sort of expect from chronic starvation. What was more of a surprise was how the men described their thinking. A good illustration of this is described by Sharman Abt-Russell in her book, Hunger. She says that the men became impatient waiting in line if the service was slow. They were possessive about their food. Some hunched over their trays, using their arms to protect their meal. Mostly they were silent, with the concentration that eating deserved. Dislikes for certain foods, such as rutabagas, disappeared. All food was eaten to the last bite. Then they licked their plates. And of course, I think most people are aware of the horrible, heinous atrocities that occurred during the Holocaust, as well as what long-term starvation does to the body. The authors shed light on, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that in addition to this, the brain actually changes and adjusts to this scarcity of food in a way that it perceives the incoming information, even if it doesn't have at all anything to do with food. We take that in, and it goes through this sort of scarcity filter, and then we then react and respond based on this newly adjusted cognitive environment. They were focused on food, which of course, if you're starving, getting more food should be a priority. But their minds focused in a way that transcended practical benefits. The delusions of starting a restaurant, comparing food prices, and researching cookbooks will not alleviate hunger. If anything, all this thinking about food, almost a fixation, surely heightened the pain of hunger. They did not choose this. And then there's one of the men in the Minnesota study. He talks about his frustration when he says, "I didn't know many other things in my life that I looked forward to being over with any more than this experiment. And it wasn't so much because of physical discomfort, but because it made food the most important thing in my life. Food became the one central and only thing really in one's life. And life is pretty dull if that's the only thing. I mean, if you went out to a movie, you weren't particularly interested in the love scenes, but you noticed every time they ate and what they ate." So the authors go on to explain that here's the thing. These hungry men in this study didn't choose for the ideas of food, the thoughts of food, the visuals of food to just completely take over. What happened is that scarcity captured their minds. Just as the starving subjects had food on their mind, when we experience scarcity of any kind, we become absorbed by it. The mind orients automatically, powerfully toward unfulfilled needs. For the hungry, that need is food. For the busy, it might be a project that needs to be finished. For the cash-strapped, it might be this month's rent payment. For the lonely, a lack of companionship. Scarcity is more than just the displeasure of having very little. It changes how we think. It imposes itself on our minds. So here's where I would say to my students, all right, this is time for the application of whatever theory we're talking about, and then applying it to the topic of our discussion. Sort of let's bring it home and make it real for us, make it relatable to what what's currently going on, which is obviously what we're all dealing with right now is a pandemic. And I'm resisting saying global pandemic since we've got one of our recent college graduates walking around reminding me that this is redundant because the word global is inherent in the word pandemic. We've got a lot of togetherness right now. Of course, a crisis of this magnitude very quickly, immediately separates the haves from the have-nots. And for an adult who's somehow been conditioned along the way into this place of fear-based thinking and a mindset of scarcity, it doesn't take much to revert them right back to this place. And this is evident by the empty shelves in grocery stores across the U.S., especially it's kind of become a joke about toilet paper. Can't find it anywhere because people are hoarding it, and there are signs up, saying limit one per customer now to kind of remind us that we don't need to do this. And in our small, little, tiny country store in our town, instead of saying, limit one per customer, it's a very personal note from the store owner that says, please be mindful during these difficult times to take only what you absolutely need. And this can present a real challenge to the fear-based mind because there's a good person under there, knowing that there are lots of people, lots and lots and lots of people who don't have enough and who are barely making it. And yet the brain is in this, autopilot saying, no, grab all the toilet paper you can. This is an emergency. This is an emergency. Did you hear me? Ding, 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 ding. And this other thing is that this fear is generalized. It's not just about the money. It can be. And it can also be, this slow burn of, okay, yeah, I have enough right now, but I could lose my job any minute now. Or maybe I did lose my job. And what if I can't get another one? What if my partner loses their job too? Then we're really screwed. And what if I'm a single parent and I'm it? What if I lose my job? Or I already did and I just applied for unemployment. Grab the toilet paper, grab the toilet paper. This may be it. What if I am in my 50s and just lost my job and I worked, my whole life to build this career? Who's going to hire me at 55? What if I never get another job, or what if I do, but it's nowhere near enough to support my house? What if I lose my house? What if I don't ever had to have this nice friends group I had at work ever again? What if I get evicted from my apartment? And this fear-based panic also ties right in with Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs. And I'll tell you that Abraham Maslow is my all-time favorite psychologist. And because he can just relate to everybody, he's just so down to earth and actually falls in the category of humanistic psychologists. And his very famous hierarchy of needs, picture a pyramid, like in Egypt. And there were originally 6 tiers. You also often see 5. I'm not sure if Abe gave his permission for that, but the bottom tier, and they do go into pecking order. So the bottom tier is physiological needs, our physiological needs. The next one is safety. The one above that is love/belonging. The one after that is esteem. After that, self-actualization. And then the top is self-transcendence, which is often missing on some. I think it definitely belongs there. So anyway, the one that's first is our physiological needs. And the point that Abe says is that we cannot move an inch without having our physiological needs met first. Food, water, sex meant for the reproductive piece and keeping the species going, not necessarily, pleasing our happy place. And it's truth right there, because after that is safety. That's a very close second. So this means that the third one up there, sense of love and belonging, being concerned about going out with the girls, golfing, bowling, happy hour, whatever. We are not in any way focused on the social piece and what those needs are when we're about to be evicted. And when we may not have enough food for tonight, never mind tomorrow, never mind water. We get stuck in this place when we're hungry of cannot think about anything else, which goes along with the authors of Scarcity. And with this current pandemic, excuse me, with this current pandemic, this just becomes just so exemplified. What's also interesting is someone could have, been conditioned early on and be sort of, cranking along just fine. And I'm thinking of a friend of mine who is also a colleague. She's a professor, and she's been very open about growing up in a rural area and very, very poor. And her parents, they were a close family, actually. The parents, you know, were doing everything they could. They had a large family. And she told me about nights where her mom would just explain to her, we've got a few more days until the food stamps, you know, uh, are there because it's the first of the month. And she remembers being told that all there was popcorn in that night. And, they were taught to be grateful. And she said sometimes it would be 3 nights in a row of popcorn for dinner until the day they could go and get food at the store. And she also told me here she is, here she's a professional person. She has a house, a partner. And she explained to me how, she'd be flying along just fine. And it doesn't take much to flip the switch and have her land right back there. And like we've been talking about, it doesn't have to necessarily be a food thing or a money thing, but she is very clear that she reverts right back to, not having enough and feeling the need to be in survival mode and grab whatever she needs to grab. For her, it's usually food. And she, of course, is now able to talk herself through that. And she does this with, very well at this point. She has just been very clear that it's taken her a very long time to get to this place, to talk herself through, um, sort of the irrationality at this place in her life, that she doesn't need to, allow these thoughts to take over anymore. So this goes along with what we've been saying all the way along through the episodes with the worry circuit and the amygdala flipping the switch on the threat circuit, alerting us to danger. The scarcity mind kicks into gear for survival reasons, so that with that the species will continue to make it. And the authors of the scarcity book explain that when scarcity captures the mind, we become more attentive and efficient. There are many situations in our lives where maintaining focus can be challenging. We procrastinate at work because we keep getting distracted. We buy overpriced items at the grocery store because our minds are elsewhere. A tight deadline or a shortage of cash focuses us on the task at hand. With our minds riveted, we are less prone to careless error. And this makes perfect sense. Scarcity captures us because it is important, worthy of our attention. The authors go on to say that we can't fully choose when our minds will be riveted. We think about that impending project not only when we sit down to work on it, but also when we are at home trying to help our child with her homework. The same automatic capture that helps us focus becomes a burden in the rest of life. Because we are preoccupied by scarcity, because our minds constantly return to it, we have less mind to give to the rest of life. This is more than a metaphor. We can directly measure mental capacity, or as we call it, bandwidth. We can measure fluid intelligence, a key source that affects how we process information and decisions. We can measure executive control, a key resource that affects how impulsively we behave. And we find that scarcity reduces all these components of bandwidth. It makes us less insightful, less forward thinking, less controlled. And the effects are large. Being poor, for example, reduces a person's cognitive capacity more than going one full night without sleep. It is not that the poor have less bandwidth as individuals. Rather, it is that the experience of poverty reduces anyone's bandwidth. So I'd like to make a shift here to what we started out talking about earlier, which is sort of the connection between fear-based thinking and deprivation, and how this can lead someone also into a deprivation-based mindset. And remember that this doesn't necessarily have to be about money or food. If you remember, scarcity is about, our own perception of we we had less than we feel we needed. So that can be food and money again, and all the things related to food and money. And it can also be emotional. We can be emotionally deprived. And it doesn't have to be that we were completely neglected. That can be the case too. And it can be that we had some love, though not as much as we feel we needed. And if we are deprived of, positive messages as a child, we can walk around as adults feeling, deprived of positive self-esteem on the inside. And sort of, there are obviously lots of examples of this. One of sort of a classic example would be the workaholic, where she or he or they are filling up every second of their day. I'm from New York, so I'm thinking Wall Street, just go 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 go, and getting lots of positive for this, lots of kudos. Look at them go, look at them go, with the title and the money that comes along with the title. And sort of looking at this as a gigantic success, which it is in some ways. Yet sometimes, not always, of course, sometimes the drive for this is coming from a place of emotional deprivation, where this adults, maybe in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or higher, is, sort of frantically, just like with the toilet paper on the shelf, frantically searching for internal feel good esteem needs by all this external reinforcement. Another example might be arrogance in general, and maybe to an extreme degree, sort of the elitist persona. Someone who maybe, perceives themselves to be better than other people, stereotypically, maybe um, being focused on a lot of image type things, and brands, nice clothes, nice this, nice that. And certainly, disclaimer, not saying everyone with money is an elitist. I'm so not saying that. We're talking about a type of persona that can stem out of deprivation sometimes. And typically, arrogance in general, there's typically some shame underlying this person, with sort of feelings of feeling less than, inadequate, or, as we said earlier, defective in some way. In fact, I've explained it to students as arrogance can be sort of a hideout for shame, kind of masking it. I tell them to kind of picture a tree fort. Sometimes shame is right out there, and we can all tell that somebody is feeling less than. And then at other times, it masks itself into something that looks, the polar opposite. It looks like somebody is, feeling on top of the world, and better than other people, elevated over other people. And again, often, not always, it's the exact opposite. And it's masking feelings of shame and deprivation underneath. And my last example, though there are more, is with adult children of alcoholics, as typically addicted families are often, honor deprived. There's often been a lot of embarrassment along the way, humiliation. And when children grow up with this, they often find themselves as young adults, older adults, seasoned adults, as, trying to get some of that honor back, especially for the oldest in the family. It can be anybody, but if that adult child, took on the role as the responsible child in the family, this is even more so. And there are actually certain professions that are kind of magnets for the adult child of an alcoholic, and specifically the responsible child. And one of these um, is anything that involves a uniform. So firefighters, police, military, for sure. Again, we're not saying all military and all firefighters, blah, 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 come from an addictive family. However, this is, like I said, a magnet for children of alcoholics. Also, anybody in the helping profession, so counselors, therapists, doctors, nurses. Again, not everybody, and it's definitely, they're definitely well represented, put it that way. And it makes great sense when an adult child is feeling honor deprived. Think about it with the uniform, or somebody comes home from defending this wonderful country of ours with a Purple Heart. If I'm not feeling honor on the inside, hey, just look at my outside. Look at my uniform. Look at me. I'm a cop. I'm a firefighter. I'm defending this country. Look at my medals. Look at me. This is where my honor is. I'm wearing it on the outside. And as far as let's pick the doctor or nurse, especially right now. I mean, there's just the heroes right now, as well, in my opinion, as well as everybody working at, Hannaford's and gas stations and everything else, for sure. But specifically with our example, um, think about a doctor who grew up as a child in an alcoholic family and honor deprived and is determined, to be a physician and a healer. And it doesn't mean that's all that went into it. However, typically it's a big driving force. Because think about it, it makes so much sense. If you don't want me, you're sure as heck gonna need me. So discussing these other examples brings us right back to the connection between fear-based thinking and deprivation, and how this kind of relates to the whole scarcity thing. So the examples of, somebody with the elitist persona, the adult child with alcoholics being honor deprived, all of this, what we're talking about, these different examples, is quite sort of an outward manifestation of, or the toilet paper crisis is an outward manifestation of all of this, because scarcity is scarcity. It's not about money necessarily. It's a mindset. It's fear of being back in that place, of being afraid we are not going to have enough of whatever it is: money, love, time, relationships, honor, whatever. It's fear that this paralyzing feeling, can return. So, in the midst of this pandemic crisis, once again, it's no big surprise that there's a shortage of things. And at the same time, I think it's good to have this awareness after this talk that there are lots and lots and lots of people who are walking around with very amped up limbic systems, with their worry circuits in full tilt, because it doesn't take much to flip the switch on somebody who's fear-based or deprivation-based to begin with. And something as, sort of severe as what we're all going through right now has me thinking that the numbers of people walking around, functioning, from the outside looking in, can't even tell necessarily, that are really, walking around, pretty overwhelmed with very raw, fear-based feelings. So here's the thing. All varieties of scarcity result in a shortage of bandwidth, and kind of leads to a scarcity trap. One of these big consequences is it affects us in daily life with our executive functioning, as far as being able to plan, answer emails, things like balance a checkbook, even estimating the amount in our bank account, registering the car, ba 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 ba. So the authors of the scarcity book basically say that their argument is simple, and that's that scarcity captures our attention. And this provides a narrow benefit because we do better at a job of, our tasks and managing whatever pressing needs we may have. But more broadly, it costs us as we become less effective in the rest of our lives and less attentive. Less attentive, as the author said earlier, with, reading to a child and our head is in our, whatever our fear is with losing our job and such, therefore having us less emotionally available. So what do we do about these fear-based thoughts? And we've come up with some strategies on the last few episodes, and one of the big ones is very deliberate, purposeful breathing. Is one of my students used to say, with puffy lungs, and this just isn't like a touchy-feely non-remedy remedy. It's very, very real, because neurologically speaking, when we take a big, intentional, deliberate breath, the mind is immediately brought back into the body. Out of next Tuesday, next month, tomorrow, when you're going to have a chat with your boss about if your business is going to open again in 30 days, it takes our minds right out of there, brings them back into our bodies, or takes them out of, last week, last year, 2 years ago. And because again, anxiety comes from thinking about the past or the future. So if we are 100% invested in this present moment, theoretically, there should be no anxiety. Emphasis on 100%, not 95. There should be no anxiety. And once again, one thing I like about mindfulness, which is so different from all these other meditations out there, and certainly those are all good too, kind of whatever works for you. There's standing ones, sitting ones, mountain ones, river ones, blah, 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 blah. For me, I like mindfulness because it's non-judgmental and I can take it with me, because I'm definitely not the type to sit still for very long. In fact, I think sitting is rather overrated. And I relax when in motion, running and skiing and hiking in the woods and things like that. And the beauty of mindfulness is it's about being in the moment with whatever you're doing, in a conversation, in the shower, hiking, skiing, cooking, eating. It's all about being in the moment and enjoying whatever you're doing and with whomever you're doing it with in this moment. And the thing is, from a working memory standpoint, truth right here is the only things that are going to make it into long-term memory, which is basically, the bookshelves of our minds. The only things that are going to make it onto the bookshelves, we can retrieve them later, are the things we are attenuating to. So anything we're not paying attention to is going right out the door, stage left. So if we want this conversation to stick, this quality time with our child, reading a book to stick, surprise, friend at the door, that valuable moment to stick, hunting with granny, whatever it is, we have to be attenuating to it. So if we go back to thinking about what we were just saying with scarcity and the effects it has on our bandwidth in dramatically reducing our ability to be emotionally available, I mean, just think about this and how important it is to be mindful. A calm mind is a powerful mind, and a very busy, overbusy mind is most typically a very sad mind. So I'm going to read you a little something from Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. If you've ever read his books or watched him he's got some YouTubes out there, he's absolutely amazing. He's so good. I strongly encourage you. The Power of Now, and I think it's New Earth. I forget the other one. It's on my shelf. Anyway, Eckhart says, are you worried? Do you have many what-if thoughts? If so, you are identified with your mind, which is projecting itself into an imaginary future situation and creating fear. There is no way you can cope with such a situation because it doesn't exist. It's a mental phantom. You can stop this health and life corroding insanity simply by acknowledging the present moment. Become aware of your breathing. Feel the air flowing in and out of your body. Feel your inner energy field. All that you ever have to deal with, cope with in real life, as opposed to imaginary mind projections, is this moment. Ask yourself what problem you have right now, not next year, tomorrow, or 5 minutes from now. What is wrong with this moment? You can always cope with the now, but you can never cope with the future, nor do you have to. The answer, the strength, the right action, or the resource will be there when you need it, not before and not after. And this brings me back to my personal favorite definition of stress, and there are a lot of them out there, which is that stress is wanting the present moment to be something other than it is. And it's only when we accept that the present moment is what it is that the stress actually dissipates. And just think about how much sense this makes if we take the example of blowing a tire on a highway. Let's say cell phone's dead. Most often we are on our way to somewhere, right? It might be work, a date, school, whatever. It's not the blown tire that's causing us stress. It's that we're going to be late, somebody's expecting us, we're going to get in trouble with the boss, somebody might stop to help us who's sketchy, or no one tries to help us, it's getting dark, the money the tire's going to cost, blah, 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 blah. It's not the actual tire blowing that's causing the stress. And another example I'm thinking of was years and years ago. I remember Oprah saying something about when she was knocked flat on her back with the flu, not a little sick, as in no matter what, she could not get up, and she had some very important something to be at, and she was just so stressed out because it was so important, and it was something very meaningful. I don't remember what it was, but something that had a lot of meaning. It was big and huge, and she spoke about it. Eventually she just had to come to terms with, I'm flat on back with my flu. This isn't going to happen. It's not in the cards. It's not physically possible. And it was, not until the moment that she accepted that whatever it was wasn't going to happen, that she kind of, became at peace with it. And then she began to talk about how her partner Stedman was, bringing her hot tea and sitting next to her. She got to read a book, which she hasn't, read. She hadn't read a book in a really long time. And kind of once she started to feel a little better, she kind of made it by accepting this, sort of looked at the present moment differently, and that she got to spend this time with him and take this time to nurture herself when she was so sick. As far as stress being, wanting the present moment to be something other than it is, also goes along with what we were saying earlier, or and Carl Jung said earlier, that which we resist will persist. And when we're wrestling with the present moment, trying to change it into what we want it to be, give all that energy to trying to change something we have no control over, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This also brings us back to the basics of thoughts come first and feelings come second. So if we are allowing fear-based thoughts, we are then going to feel fear. And we are then going to grab all the toilet paper we can off the shelf. This is how it works. Which leads us into, once again, there are only two choices as far as this goes. We can control our thoughts, or our thoughts control us. And once again, no one said this is easy. Practicing thought control takes commitment and effort. And then, of course, follow through, because what we practice, no matter what this is, we inevitably will get good at. And not only this, but it will get easier. We'll have to put in less energy the longer we stay with it. So if we relate this to what's currently going on right now, just think about this. There's nothing like a pandemic, a global crisis, and the resulting quarantine to force us to maybe get a little better at embracing the present moment. And in the midst of all this suffering and scarcity, as we talked about, maybe the bless in the mess for us, for humanity, maybe, is that we're being redirected, back to the basics, to a more simple way of living, in a higher quality of life. And people are taking walks, especially with dogs. I know Giovanni, our golden retriever, is a huge fan of quarantine. People are playing board games, baking cookies, and also getting really, really creative. And the people are really, extending so much kindness and goodness out there. I know that at least in Vermont, and I'm sure all over the country in different areas, people are driving school buses here to families who, literally don't have any food right now. And people are making masks for the heroes on the front lines of hospitals and healthcare places, just doing so much to try to help each other out. The medical heroes, all inclusive, nurses, doctors, medical assistants, pharmacists, everybody, and again, the folks working in the grocery stores, gas stations, all of this are doing these, 12, 14-hour shifts, just going above and beyond, and people helping people. And I think that there's definitely some blessing in this. And that said, I think it would be very fitting to wind up our discussion with FDR as well, since this is how we started. And this great American president says, happiness lies not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of creative effort. The joy and moral stimulation of work no longer must be forgotten in the mad chase of evanescent profits. These dark days will be worth all they cost us if they teach us that our true destiny is not to be ministered unto, but to minister to ourselves and to our fellow men. This is Kimberly Quinn signing off from Northern Vermont. Have a mindful day.